Greetings, humanity! Today is Wednesday, February 18th, 2026. Let's grok the news. I'm Robert Gardner, using Grok each weekday to help me search out and to summarize the biggest headlines in the news today. You also get the unparalleled benefit of this observer's opinions. We review a roundup of the most critical reports in the world, from Geneva, from Tehran, from Mecca, from Washington, D.C., from Manila, from Los Angeles, from Chicago, from the Philippines, from the entire world. But first, a deep dive into today's top story right after this. God with us. The story of Jesus is a full blending of all the Gospels into one continuous narrative that misses nothing from the Savior's life. Inspired by the majestic text of the King James Bible, God with Us is adapted to modern language and formatted for easy reading. A faithful paraphrase divided into brief stories fit for daily Bible studies. The story of Jesus, from his birth to his ascension. Find God with Us by Robert Gardner. That's me at Amazon.com or wherever books are sold. And now, let's grok the most important news in the world today, starting with our lead story, Dateline Geneva, Switzerland. U.S. and Iranian officials reported meaningful progress in the second day of indirect nuclear talks held in Geneva, mediated by Oman, as both sides edged toward addressing long-standing disputes over Iran's nuclear program amid heightened regional tensions and military posturing. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has hailed the discussions as constructive, announcing an understanding on guiding principles for future negotiations, though he stressed that significant work remains and that Iran will not limit its missile or nuclear capabilities under pressure. Then what's the point? U.S. officials described the roughly 3-hour session as yielding good progress, meaning nothing has happened, toward identifying common goals and technical issues with expectations for detailed Iranian proposals in the coming weeks. The talks occur against a backdrop of U.S. naval buildup in the Middle East and Iran's military exercises, with warnings from Washington that diplomacy could fail and force other options. President Trump's indirect involvement was noted as envoys, including Steve Witkoff, pushed for curbs on Iran's program, while Tehran insists on sanctions relief and recognition of its rights. While no breakthrough deal emerged, the positive tone marks a step forward in high-stakes diplomacy that hopes to avert escalation to war in the Gulf. This observer does not care for the idea of 2 aircraft carrier fleets being tied down for weeks of slow negotiations that may lead nowhere, with a regime that has broken every promise it has ever made, while the people of Iran were goaded into dying in the streets for freedom with the promise of American help ringing in their dying ears. And now we grok the headlines from around the globe. Dateline Tehran. New details emerged from Iran's protest crackdowns, with X-rays revealing deliberate targeting of vital body parts by security forces during suppression of anti-government demonstrations. I sincerely hope that the U.S. president does not actually believe he can come to terms with the savage Islamists who rule Iran with the bloodiest hands on earth in our lifetimes. Dateline Geneva, Switzerland. U.S.-mediated peace talks between Russia and Ukraine resumed for a second day in Geneva, described as tense, but yielding meaningful progress. There's that sort of terminology again. Meaningful progress toward ending the 4-year war, with focus on territorial claims, security guarantees, and practical mechanics amid ongoing drone strikes. No major breakthroughs reported yet. Here's another example of being tied to a diplomatic table instead of taking action. As far as the U.S. is concerned, even if the action is to walk away. Dateline Mecca, Saudi Arabia, and around the globe. Ramadan 2026 began in many Muslim-majority countries following moon sightings, starting today in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf, while others, like Iran, will begin Thursday, with observances in Gaza complicated by fragile ceasefire conditions, food shortages, and restrictions. Dateline Washington, D.C. The U.S. military conducted strikes on 3 more suspected drug smuggling boats in the Eastern Pacific and Caribbean, with Southcom reporting 11 narco-terrorists killed in operations targeting transnational criminal networks. Dateline Lima. Peru's Congress ousted the interim president Jose Geri just 4 months in office over corruption allegations because he failed to disclose his talks with a Chinese national, triggering processes to select a new interim leader and raising concerns of political instability in Peru. This observer frankly does not know whether this is good news or bad news for Peru. Dateline Manila. Vice President Sara Duterte announced her intention to run for president in the 2028 elections, signaling major political shifts once again in the country amid ongoing domestic and regional dynamics. Dateline Northern California. Rescuers continued searching for 9 missing skiers after a backcountry avalanche trapped victims in the northern mountains, with 6 others rescued amid the harsh winter conditions. Dateline Los Angeles. Fallout from the Jeffrey Epstein documents intensified as Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass urged the LA 28 Olympics Committee Chair Casey Wasserman to resign over alleged Epstein emails amid broader scrutiny of related individuals. Dateline Chicago. Civil rights icon Reverend Jesse Jackson, the pioneering activist, Baptist minister, and 2-time Democratic presidential candidate, a man who worked alongside Martin Luther King Jr., and who reshaped U.S. politics through voter mobilization and social justice advocacy, has died at 84, if you had not already heard. Jackson passed peacefully, surrounded by family, after battling progressive supranuclear palsy. Tributes poured in from leaders including Barack Obama, who credited him as a foundation for his own path. The two actually did not like each other in life. And President Trump also had his praises. He called Jackson a force of nature. Dateline Bayer headquarters in Germany. Pharmaceutical giant Bayer has agreed to a $7.25 billion settlement to resolve thousands of lawsuits claiming its Roundup weed killer caused cancer, marking a major step in long-running legal battles. Dateline Canberra. Australia has banned one of its citizens from returning home from a Syrian camp due to alleged links to the Islamic State militant group, citing national security risks. When even Australia says that you and your ISIS connections are too Islamic for their own good, you are too Islamic for anyone's good. Dateline Paris, France. 9 people were arrested in connection with the death of patriotic student activist Quentin Deranque, sparking political reactions and an ongoing investigation into the circumstances. He was beaten to death with iron pipes. A moment of silence was held by the French National Assembly in memory of Drank, beaten to death by far-left Antifa activists. Dateline Milan Cortina, Italy. U.S. figure skater Amber Glenn, well, I guess you could call her a stater. She made her statements. She was a self-described woke activist, and she was overcome with emotion yesterday after placing 13th in the women's short program at the Winter Olympics. Perhaps she should have focused more on her sport and less on her political identity. Dateline Austin and Tallahassee. Texas and Florida authorities have moved to prevent schools, public schools, from leading or organizing anti-ICE walkout protests, citing concerns over educational involvement in political demonstrations. Not to mention liability. In this observer's opinion, every educator who is involved in this kind of activity should at the very least lose their jobs, if not face civil and potentially criminal charges. Endangering the youth for the sake of your politics? They're too young to have real opinions. They're not trusted to vote. Why put them out on the streets in danger? Dateline, Rhode Island. A shooter at an ice rink killed his ex-wife and son before the attack, with the transgender suspect having warned of going berserk the day before. Hockey players recounted the traumatic event. This observer is no more surprised than you are that yet another deranged, drug-crazed, transsexual individual is suspected of being the violent murderer. Dateline Jakarta, Indonesia. Indonesia's reversal on closing a coal plant has raised doubts about its energy transition commitments and climate goals amid international pressure. Well, good for Jakarta, says this observer. But clean up your act, Indonesia. Nobody likes smog. Transition to clean energy just as soon as it's cheaply available, and it doesn't hurt to curb the emissions. By the way, folks, cheap, clean energy is not widely available yet. But with the new small-scale nuclear plants, it's potentially closer than you think. It actually has been for a long time. Dateline, Washington, D.C. Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto has arrived in Washington for bilateral meetings and discussions with Trump's Board of Peace on global issues. And this observer calls that good news. I thank you for listening. Please join me tomorrow to once again grok the news. I'm Robert Gardner. Godspeed and God bless.